had just come back from Iraq and you're just kind of personally upset of it. You feel that this China threat is very real, and that, could you elaborate on why you think it's a legitimate threat?
Because the mainland Chinese political leadership in Beijing, I think, has made it clear, and in fact, much of the Chinese population also feels that Taiwan is a part of something called China, and that no unilateral decision should be made that alter that situation as understood differently by each side. Now, many people, including myself, might not accept that or agree with that, but I think this is deeply felt by most of the current Chinese political leadership and by a surprisingly large proportion of the mainland Chinese population, even many people who are Democrats. And so I worry that if Taiwan moves toward a dramatic unilateral change in the status quo, as would be indicated by a declaration of independence, a change in the name of the country and the flag of the country, something that suggests that Taiwan is deciding on its own to make a permanent and irreparable split with the mainland, that this could well result in military action. And I think to think that the Chinese won't do it because of fear for the short-term economic consequences, or they won't do it because they fear that it might derail the Olympics, I think all of these things underestimate the force of Chinese nationalism. That doesn't mean that Taiwan needs to concede to Beijing's demands. It doesn't mean they need to accept any particular political arrangement. It certainly doesn't mean that they have to accept one country, two systems. I think that would be totally unfair and inappropriate to be imposed upon Taiwan. It just means that if Taiwan is serious about maintaining stability and avoiding war, they should, the leadership in Taipei should exercise restraint in terms of any unilateral changes in the status quo, and that means that President Chen Shui-bian should continue to adhere to all of the commitments that he has made over the last 4 years, such as the 5 no's.
You also strongly stated your sort of opposition about the referendum, almost like a promise had been broken or something. Why is that so quote unquote illegal or not right from an American perspective?
It wasn't illegal. I never suggested that it was illegal. I think, first of all, it was imprudent and unnecessary. I mean, the questions that were asked were almost ridiculous. Who's going to disagree, really, with the text of the questions? Are you upset that missiles are being stockpiled and pointed at Taiwan from across the Strait? Of course. Any peace-loving and democratic-minded person would be upset about it. It's wrong, and China shouldn't be doing it. But what's the purpose of having this declared in a referendum? And as far as the arms sales are concerned, they're going on, and it's clear that if Taiwan acts with restraint and is threatened by the mainland, the United States will help it prepare for its own defense, and most people in Taiwan will want that to happen. But so the referendum, I think, is viewed by many people as basically kind of a provocative act of having a referendum to hold a referendum, to show that a referendum can be held, and to establish that referendums can happen, so that if there is ever a desire to have a referendum on changing the status of the country, it could be done. And therefore, the mainland Chinese political leadership takes this as as a provocative act, even if many Taiwanese don't see it that way. And the United States had asked that this not be done. And I think that the Taiwan political leadership did not do the country a great service by going ahead to organize a referendum anyway. I think that there was a principled feeling on the part of many people within the DPP and perhaps the president himself that the people of Taiwan should have the ability to declare their views on matters in a referendum, and if they couldn't have it on other matters, they would have it on something.
There's quite a bit of controversy over the legitimacy of the polls. Just one side is like, oh, polls can be inaccurate and should not be determined towards who actually wins an election. You referred to a poll that you said was unreleased to the public, and you said that the blue side would have clearly won. Could you refer to? Could you elaborate on what this poll was and what?
I was informed by someone who is well placed in, the inner circles of politics and political analysis in Taiwan, that an independent polling agency who was doing a private poll, because none could be released in the final 10 days, found that just before the assassination, the pan-blue ticket had something like a 10-point lead. It was, in essence, 55-45. And that when, in the immediate wake of the assassination, it closed overnight, with a shift of 5 points in each direction to a 50-50 race. Now, the reason this strikes me as quite plausible and accurate is that 50-50 was basically the outcome. And the polling company is regarded as highly professional by people whose judgment I respect in Taiwan.
They had enough time to do an independent poll after the assassination?
You can do tracking polls by telephone on a daily basis. Absolutely. You do telephone polls. You can do a poll in a matter of hours in Taiwan if you want a rough and ready assessment by telephone.
Respond to a poll right after they vote. So
the exit poll.
Yeah, like are you aware of the results of
no.
that? Well, I've been informed that the exit poll indicated a 6% advantage for the blue camp, which and that, as far as I know, that poll is considered to be the most accurate one because it's people actually walking out of polling stations. So. Why, but that seems to contradict with what you were informed of.
Not entirely. Let me say two things. First of all, there could have been a rapid shift and a rapid shift back, although you're talking almost about a matter of hours. Second of all, exit polls can be wrong. Polling all polls can be wrong. When we say that a poll has a 5% margin of error, that means it has a 95% confidence level. And it means that 1 out of every 20 such polls that will be conducted, will be wrong in some way. The margin of, put it more precisely, if you have polls that are statistically significant in their reliability to a 95% level, it means that 1 time out of 20 they'll fall outside the margin of error of, let's say, 3 percentage points or whatever it is. And even if even if it's one of the times that it's more or less accurate, the margin of error is still there. A poll cannot be precise, particularly in a 50-50 race. The poll could be off 1 or 2 percentage points. So you've got to take polls with some grain of salt. And an exit poll in particular, they've been wrong in the United States before. It's not a perfect science. I'm an academic. It is not my job to support a political party in Taiwan or political candidate. But I will say that I have many friends in the DPP. I have a lot of admiration for what they have done to come up as a democratic political force in the country, make the political system in Taiwan more open and more democratic and more competitive, and the enthusiasm they have brought for deepening democracy and cracking down on what's called black gold politics.
Do you know how much the black gold corruption has it been cracked down a lot in this last administration? Did you
I think that the Justice Minister Chen Ding-nan, from what I've heard, has made some progress in this regard, and you know, they've certainly made some kind of priority of this, and I think there's less vote buying now than there used to be, and probably less influence of criminal gangs than there used to be. This is my impression. Well, the American interest is in having Taiwan be a secure and stable democracy that can thrive in freedom and eventually have its model of a free economy, a free society, and a free and democratic political system become an inspiration for, and in some ways perhaps a model of, democratic change in all of mainland China. I mean, that's the American national interest. Part of that national interest is in having peace in the region so that Taiwan can prosper, so that the region can develop, and so that ultimately China can negotiate a path of internal political change. And what I've been suggesting to you is that if Taiwan were to take precipitous actions to change the status quo in ways, whether substantively or symbolically, that would suggest either a declaration of independence or a move toward independence, that this would both endanger Taiwan's own safety and security, and it would also whip up mainland Chinese nationalism in a way that I think would be very counterproductive for democratic progress on the mainland. And I think ultimately it could lead to a military conflict between Taiwan and China in which the United States would be forced to intervene.
Why would the United States be forced to intervene?
Because we don't want to see military force be used to conquer and swallow a free and independent country. It's a matter of principle for us. And I think actually, believe it or not, most people have trouble believing it outside the United States. But believe it or not, I think the principle is more important than the security elements of having China control the island of Taiwan. Strategically, that is not as disastrous as having mainland China be able to conquer another political system by force.
What is Chinese nationalism in the way you're referring to it?
Chinese nationalism is a strong identification with China as a whole country and a great power, of which all Chinese can be proud. And many Chinese believe, I think the majority of Chinese believe, that China cannot be a great country if it is a divided country. There's a symbolism here that's very important. After all, Taiwan is a very small island. Why should it matter to a huge country of 1 billion people? But it's the symbolism, given the history of the humiliation of China by Western powers and then Japan over the last 150 years or so. It's the humiliation of division that leads many Chinese to feel that it would be a terrible thing for China if this were made permanent. Now, I think that that is for future generations to work out. I don't think this conflict can be resolved now. That's why I think it's so important that the status quo be preserved. The status quo allows Taiwan, in essence, to be a free and independent political system. So for now, that's the most that I think is achievable in terms of what many Taiwan independence advocates are seeking.
Some opponents of the referendum see it as if it had passed, it would have been set a precedent towards step by step moving towards not official independence, but like as you guys were referring to, like moving along sands, and although that's technically not declaring independence, it's essentially the same thing, sort of. If it had passed, would it really be as dangerous as some people claim, or I mean, what would have been the consequences?
I don't think passing the referendum would have led to civil war, but everything adds up. It's the accumulation of all these little things. And I think as much damage was done simply by the fact of holding the referendum as might have been done by then having it pass. I think in the end, Taiwan needs to focus on more practical issues of building a constructive relationship with the mainland across the strait that will put aside the political issues. No movement toward unification and no movement toward independence. Just freeze the status quo, put the political issues aside, and focus on the issues of economic interchange and to some extent social interchange, in which the two sides do have significant common interests of creating a more dynamic interchange between them, and in which the social and economic and, in a way, normative interaction between the island and the mainland could, over time, help to stimulate democratic change in mainland China. And that is the prospect that is most fundamentally in Taiwan's long-term interest.
Some would say that what you're suggesting leads towards reunification, which is...
No, I don't think it has to lead toward unification at all. I think it's very imaginable that 3 generations from now, in a democratic China, either a democratic China will say, the heck with it. If they want to be independent, they can be independent. Or that China will fall apart and then it won't matter. There'll be several different Chinas and Taiwan can be one of them. Or that a democratic China and a democratic Taiwan will, in the end, negotiate some very loose association, maybe even looser than the current European Union, that gives China some sense of having a whole China and Taiwan effective independence. So there are many different scenarios here, but I think you're looking at a long period of time, possibly more than a generation, possibly 2 or 3, until some more stable and mutually acceptable outcome is reached.